The question is, where do we begin? Reminds me of a story of a book fair in Dublin, where one of the authors gets up and thought he'd be the wise guy and asked the audience, where do I begin? And a feisty little Irishman in the front shouted, in the beginning, stupid. And so where do I begin? In the beginning. And the beginning was a very auspicious day. In fact, it was in February 1929, the 10th day of February 1929. And if you've had any creative writing classes or any classes in any kind of English literature or American literature, you were always told that the first sentence in anything you write, or the first paragraph anyway, should be a grabber, making people want to turn the pages and go on. And the most popular first sentence was something that somebody like Stephen King would use. It was a dark and stormy night. And then go on from there. Well, that's exactly what February 10th, 1929 was, a dark and stormy night. It had been a snowstorm the day before. And my dad had to drive my mother in labor to the Kearney Catholic Hospital in Boston. Now, the Kearney Catholic Hospital in Boston was one of the best. They had to drive from my hometown of Quincy to Boston in a snowstorm. So at any rate, my dad was sitting in the waiting room because they obviously didn't let anybody into the labor room in those days. And the obstetrician, of course he was an MD, they didn't have any obstetricians, he was a doctor. And he came out to speak to my dad. And he had a long drawn look on his face. And this story my dad told me so many times. And my father, of course, is worried. You see this doctor come out with a long, very sad look. And he said, Mr. Tower, I've got to tell you this, in all honesty, this is going to be a very, very difficult birth. And right now, he says, I'm really thinking of doing a cesarean. Now, a cesarean in 1929 was a very serious thing. And my father just looked there and says, well, what does that mean? So that means, he says, that it's going to be a difficult birth, as I said. And I'm going to have to tell you that in a Catholic hospital, says we'd always save the baby. My father heard this, he was incredulous. Telling this doctor's telling me he may or may not save the baby or my wife. And then the doctor added, you're going to have to tell me that if it gets to a certain point, who do we save? The mother or the child? Didn't know it was going to be a boy or a girl that day. And again, my father was as nervous as could be, and he was the most quiet, laid-back gentleman you ever knew. You remember him. And he said, well, he says, my wife, of course, I want my wife saved, but I'd rather have you save them both. So the doctor said, I'll do everything I can, and of course, we know how it came out. And I came out, and from that point on, of course, my father had always talked about that particular night. That was it was his evening of becoming a father. And there I was. And anyway,
Grandpa, I have a question.
Yes.
Was it a C-section in the end?
Yes, it was.
Oh, wow.
Well, yes, I should have said that. It was a C-section, just like Jesse.
Yeah, I was a C-section.
If Jesse could make it, I can too. At any rate, 3 years later, I was rushed to the same hospital with an emergency appendectomy. And in those days, an emergency appendectomy was very, very serious also. But as you see, I survived. And then I always think of my childhood, in so many words, as being a storybook childhood in every way. When I look back at it, during the time I was growing up, when I look back at that childhood, it was a storybook childhood. It was full of love, full of fun, full of laughter.
Where was it?
In Quincy, Massachusetts. And beside that, it was a lot of respect and dignity that each person. My dad had 6 sisters. Each sister was married, and each one had some children. So I was never an only child. I always was surrounded by aunts and uncles and children, cousins. I had 12 cousins at one time. And it was the kind of childhood and the kind of family that I always felt I would use as a template for any family I would have. And thank goodness we've got that. We've got that same laughter, that same fun, that same closeness, that same respect, and I'm so pleased to see that. And of course, Judy, my late wife would have been very, very pleased to see that. And she saw some of the beginnings of it before she passed on. But again, that childhood was so difficult to describe in any other way than a storybook, and that's exactly what it was. And when I was growing up, I had a lot of friends. And growing up in Quincy, it was a very small city at the time, just 12, 15 miles from Boston. And it was a nice place to grow up. I still consider Quincy, Massachusetts as my hometown. And I always look upon it as my hometown. I even use it in some of my codes on the computer and so on. But you're not supposed to know that.
Can I ask you a quick question? Can you describe Quincy?
Yes, Quincy
in
at the
the
time.
30s?
Quincy at the time. In fact, I described Quincy quite well in my book, The Wayfarers. The first chapter takes place in Quincy. Quincy was a shipyard town. The Bethlehem Steel Shipbuilding Company was the big business in Quincy. That's where most of the jobs were. And during the Depression, that was, of course, a place where people could get work. And that was a difficult thing to get anywhere else. And Quincy was a very, very small town, but it had 60,000 people. If you can imagine, it was it wasn't Tedford, but it was a small town. That small town atmosphere, the closeness, everybody liking and loving one another. And there was no prejudice of any kind that I can ever remember in Quincy. I was part of a small Jewish community, perhaps 200, 250 people at the most. And we were embedded, you might say, using today's vernacular, we were embedded with the Italian community. And we became very, very close with the Italian community. In fact, we played sports with them, our competition, baseball, basketball, football, everything. It was the Italians versus the Jews. We won some, lost some, they won some, lost some, and we were still good friends.
So who was better at like certain sports?
No, no, I'd have to say it was pretty equal if I remember all that time. It was tough competition, believe me. And even today, here we are many, many, many decades later, even today, I still maintain touch with some of my Italian friends as well as my Jewish friends from Quincy. And it's nice to have that kind of a background, and that was Quincy for you. Quincy was a very patriotic town, the home of John Adams and John Quincy Adams. So it was constantly talking about the Adams family and so on. So we're a patriotic town, having two presidents born in Quincy, and me. At one time they had the billboards saying this is the hometown of John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and Stu Tower. For some reason they removed my name, I don't know. But at any rate, growing up in Quincy, if that answers your question, it was a pleasure. It was fun.
Were you bookish? Did you read a lot, or were you more athletic?
Both.
Yeah.
I read an awful lot. I was, well, I don't like to say this, but I was a pretty intelligent kid. But in fact, I was always the head of the class all the way through elementary school. There was no kindergarten. So you went right into, that's why I graduated at 17, which I'll get into also. But at that point, in Quincy, I felt that it was always home.
Yeah.
You felt you were going home. That was home. And my parents, as I said again, in a minuscule look at the family, the whole family, which was quite a few people, my parents were the same. They were full of fun. They were full of love, full of respect. That's how I was surrounded that way for all my childhood. If you can picture that. And in retrospect, it's still there. Yeah. It's still there, and it's still here. But I had a gang. I have to admit this. We had a gang. Now, a gang in those days was not drive-by shooting. A gang was not heroin and cocaine. A gang was pretty much athletics. And we had a gang. The Quincy Jewish kids had a gang. The Quincy Italian kids had a gang. The Quincy Finnish kids had a gang. There was a big Finnish community in Quincy. And our gang, to act tough, we all had tough names, except me. I don't know why I escaped it. My name was always Stewie when I was a kid growing up. And that was it. I didn't have one of these big tough names.
Stewie sounds pretty tough to me.
Yeah.
Did they ever call you Wisecrackin' Stu?
What's that?
What, did they ever call you Wisecrackin' Stu?
Wisecrackin' Stew.
No, they never did. No, but I was always a very popular kid in my gang and popular kid in school, and it was something I thought was natural. I didn't know. And I gotta give you some of the names. My gang. One of them was called Flapper because he had big ears. His name was Marvin Schwartz, and I would have changed my name to Flapper. It was Marvin Schwartz. Another one was called Bidgie. Why? Because his name was Billy,
and his older brother could never pronounce Billy and call him Bidgie. He has that name today. He's 85 today, and he's still Bidgie, living in Quincy. Another one was named Crusher. That was my friend Mort Bernstein. Crusher. He was the only kid and only adult that I've ever known to work with weights. Back then, we're going back an awful long time, 80 years.
Yeah.
He worked with weights, and we call him Crusher. He was tough. He played football in high school. Very close friend. Unfortunately, he passed on about 5 or 6 years ago. And another one was named Dynamite. Why did we call him Dynamite? Morton Silverman. Dynamite. Named him Dynamite because he had a temper that would flare up, boom, like that.
Wow.
He would just blow sky high, so we call him Dynamite. I would doubt he's still living, but I think he is. He finally went to Wyoming to live, which was a natural place for him because he blew up just like the guys from Yellowstone Park. But, so these kind of, and one of my cousins was called Fat Boy because he was chubby. So these names held for a long, long time. Another was named Cookie. Cookie. Now, how'd you like to have that name when you're 75 years old? Cookie. And he did. He just died about 5 or 6 years ago. He was at one of my book signings in Quincy. And his name was Ed. Ed Needell, always a good friend. He had 2 older brothers and a mother and father who thought he was cute as they come, and he was. And they named him Cookie. And that stuck with him all these years. So these are some of the names, give you an idea of our so-called gang. Tough bunch of guys, you know. We wouldn't last 2 minutes at East LA now. But I cherished all these friends. I really cherished them. And of course, my closest one was Chris. You met Chris, Nate Krasnogor. We've been friends for 77 years, and not one angry word between us in 77 years. That's saying something.
Tell the story about how you and Chris used to go to Fenway Park and
Oh,
sit behind the Green Monster.
Yeah, in those days, you know, getting to Fenway Park was a kick. I mean, you get on the streetcar and get there, and you buy a ticket for 50 cents and sit in the right field bleachers. And there's the Green Monster, of course, at that time, which wasn't called that at that time. So we spent many a Sunday afternoon watching doubleheaders in Fenway Park, packing some sandwiches and sitting there for 50 cents. And, of course, we became rabid Red Sox fans, which I am today, too. But getting back to my childhood, I went to work when I was 12 years old. And that's not unusual. In those days, every kid in every family had to get a little job somewhere. It was the Depression. And anything you could help one with, or even money for yourself where you didn't have to ask for money from your parents, worked out real well. My dad had a job throughout the Depression, so it wasn't a question of destitute or anything. But I got a job working in a grocery store. There were 2 Jewish grocery stores, kosher, in Quincy. One of them was owned by my very dear friend Bob Kurtzman, his family, Bob Kurtzman's family. And I got a call one day from Bob Kurtzman saying, my dad needs you to work. So I went down at the grocery store, and Bob worked for him. He worked in the grocery store every day after school. But his father needed me for Sunday mornings to deliver. Sunday mornings was the big delivery day to all the Jewish homes in the neighborhood in Quincy, with big bags full of bagels and cream cheese and lox and all the goodies. And I knew where every house was, but I had this push cart that would hold about 20 bags and the names written on the bags, and I would go deliver them. And I always had a tip, a nickel or a dime, from the family I was delivering to. So that was my first real job.
How long did you, like 2 hours, 3 hours?
Oh, it would
5
take me a good part of the morning because I'd have to go back and reload and to go back again. And I used to get $2.
How big a push cart are we talking? How many?
Oh, it was one of these, like you see in the movies, a big, with big wheels,
Wow.
big
Oh
push
my
car,
gosh.
yeah.
That's cool.
And Bob, my friend Bob, used to have a bicycle with a big basket, so he would take about 4 or 5 bags. I would take about 20 or more at a time. And that was my job, and I used to make $2 every Sunday.
Wow.
Now, I got a little bit older, I got myself a Social Security card at age 14. And I still have it to this day.
What did that mean to have a social security?
Social Security in those days meant that you can go out and get a job anywhere, if there was an opening. So, the first job I got was in another grocery store. It paid me a little bit more money, and it was lugging big cases of milk bottles. There were no cartons in those days. So it was big cases of bottles. They were heavy. And I kept that for a while. And then somebody, and I still don't remember exactly who it was, mentioned that I should go up to Quincy Square. Quincy Square, pronounced Square in those days. Go up to Quincy Square where all the stores are located, and get yourself a job. And there's one company that's looking for somebody right now, I was told. It was a shoe store, Morse Shoes. It was a chain of shoe stores around New England. I don't think there was one in Tedford, but around New England. And anyway, I went to the store, and I met the manager, whose name was Sam Fletcher. I remember that like it was yesterday. A very nice gentleman. And he, quote unquote, interviewed me, asked me why I wanted the job. I says, because I want to go to work. And I flashed my Social Security card at him, just like you do a badge, my Social Security card. And he said, okay, he says, I'll start you off as a stock boy. I do need somebody now. Now, what was a stock boy in a shoe store? In the cellar. Everybody had a cellar in those days. And down below, it was hot as can possibly imagine, even in wintertime. Humid in the summer, hot. And you'd go down there, and all the boxes were stocked down there. So he taught me very quickly how to read the codes on the boxes. This is black shoe, this is a leather shoe, this is a patent leather shoe, this is a white shoe, and so on. And I used to have to run up and down those stairs, and I worked there Friday after school, all day Saturday. And once in a while he'd ask me to work Tuesday after school or Wednesday. And I got the magnificent salary of 35 cents an hour. And I later was promoted out of the stock cellar up into the store to be a salesman. Because he couldn't keep anybody. All the guys were being drafted in the Army, so you had to take the teenagers, at that time. And it was during World War II. And so anyway, he said, I'll give you about a half a day's training. He didn't use the word training, but I know what it was. And I want you to stand over in a corner, watch me as I sell my shoes. So that was my training.
Wow.
And then after that afternoon, the afternoon wasn't even over, if I remember. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Saturday afternoon. He says, I'm going out for lunch. Take care of the store. I was shocked. I was taking care of the store. We had a cashier girl there, and boy, she was really sexy. And hey, I was 14.
Yeah,
I was
that's
15 at that time. And so I became a salesman. So he raised me from 35 cents an hour to 35 cents an hour plus 5% commission. So and the shoes were all $2.99, $3.99, or $4.99.
Wow.
So if I sold a $5 pair of shoes, I would make a quarter.
It's amazing.
And if I sold a bow to be stapled onto the shoe, I get another quarter.
Wow.
See? And if I sold what they call a PM, past model, something that was out of use, and somebody wanted to buy that particular shoe, I got $1. So my goodness, that was really, I was in Fat City.
Was it a
Fat
busy
City.
store?
What?
Was it a busy store?
Oh, very busy. Oh, it was busy because it was cheap.
Yeah.
And then all high school girls started to discover that I was working at the shoe store. So I had a time, Jess, let me tell you, I had a time. Nothing like trying shoes on these nice girls that came in and it's just holding their leg. You want to lift that a little bit. I had a great time. I had a marvelous time. And everybody say, you got to go see Stewie Tower and get a pair of shoes for him. And I'll just say one more thing about the shoe store. That was my first real job after the deliveries and so on. I stayed in that shoe store until I got out of the Army, until I joined the Army. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And when I got home from the Army, I still got a job there while going to Everson. Same shoe store. So I always had that behind me, that I know I could make some money. And I broke the record one Easter Saturday, the day before Easter, which was the busiest time in the shoe store. And I broke the single day sales record. And I was 16 at that time, I think, 15 or 16. And Sam came up to me later and showed me the sales slips. He says, you know, you broke last year's record. I don't remember the number, but it was around $300 and some odd worth of shoes. Cheap shoes. I sold a lot of shoes. My hand was going right and left, right and left. And my girls all came in too, so we had a good time. But anyway, I'll always be thankful to Sam. I know he's long gone now, but always be thankful for him for giving me this opportunity, and it worked out real well, real well.